New York City, with its endless bustle and deep contrasts, was about to become the stage for an unexpected story. When Tyler, a 12-year-old boy, was surviving day by day on the streets, he never imagined that an encounter with Frank, a mysterious and dangerous man, would lead him to a reunion with his real father, Lawrence Swanson, a powerful businessman. But Lawrence wasn't simply a businessman. His presence and determination to seek justice would open a path towards the discovery of a child trafficking network and corruption in high places. What dark secrets will come to light, and how will this reunion change the course of their lives and of an entire society? Let's discover together this story of struggle and redemption. But before we delve into this exciting story, tell us where you're watching from today. And if you like stories full of unexpected twists and moments of justice, don't forget to subscribe. The bustling streets of New York City simmered under the scorching midday sun, amidst the chaos of street vendors, disoriented tourists, and hurried office workers. A small figure slipped like a shadow, almost invisible to passers-by. Tyler, a boy of barely 12 years old, with skin as dark as ebony and eyes that reflected a maturity beyond his years, skillfully dodged the crowd. His clothes, worn and dirty, told the story of countless nights sleeping in alleys and days searching for scraps in the city's dumpsters. Despite his young age, Tyler had learned the harsh lessons of life on the street. Distrust strangers, move fast, and above all, never show weakness. As he made his way through the crowd, his stomach growled loudly. He hadn't eaten anything since the day before, when he managed to get the leftovers of an abandoned sandwich in a park. Today, his goal was the Chelsea market, where he hoped to find something to quell his hunger. Upon reaching the bustling market, Tyler blended in among the colorful stalls, full of fruits, vegetables, and spices that filled the air with their tempting aromas. His eager eyes scanned the ground, looking for any fallen fruit or food scraps that vendors might have discarded. "Hey, kid! Get out of here!" shouted a burly vendor, menacingly waving a stick at Tyler. The boy quickly scurried away. Accustomed to this type of rejection, it wasn't the first time he had been chased off, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. As he moved away from the stall, he accidentally bumped into an elegant lady carrying several shopping bags. "Watch it, you filthy child!" exclaimed the woman, looking at him with disdain and clutching her purse more tightly, as if Tyler was going to steal it at any moment. Tyler mumbled an apology and quickly walked away, feeling the looks of disgust following him. It was a familiar sensation, that constant rejection, that forced invisibility. In his worst moments, he wondered if it had ever been different, if he had ever had a home, a family that loved him. But those thoughts were luxuries he couldn't afford. Survival was all that mattered now. With renewed determination, Tyler headed towards the back of the market, where the dumpsters promised at least some possibility of finding something edible. As he rummaged through the waste, ignoring the nauseating smell, he heard a deep voice behind him. Well, what do we have here?" Tyler turned startled, finding himself face to face with a tall, well-dressed man. His impeccable suit and gold watch contrasted strongly with the dirty surroundings of the alley. The man looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and something Tyler couldn't identify, but which made his hair stand on end. "My name is Frank," said the man, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And you, little one, what's your name?" Tyler hesitated. Years on the street had taught him to distrust strangers, especially those who showed a sudden interest in him. But something in Frank's imposing presence made him feel he had no choice. "Tyler," he finally responded, his voice barely a whisper. "Tyler," Frank repeated, savoring the name. "Tell me, Tyler, would you like to eat something decent for once?" Tyler's stomach growled in response, betraying his distrust. Frank laughed, a sound that made Tyler involuntarily shudder. "I'll take that as a yes," said Frank. "You see, I'm organizing a party tonight, a very exclusive party at my mansion, and I think you could be an interesting addition." Tyler frowned, confused. "Me, but sir, I don't—" No, Frank interrupted, raising a hand. "You don't need to say anything. Just come. I promise all the food you can eat. What do you say?" Tyler's mind was a whirlwind of contradictory thoughts. On one hand, all his instincts were screaming at him to run, that this man was up to no good, but on the other hand, the promise of food, of a roof over his head even if just for one night, was too tempting to ignore. Finally, hunger won the battle. "Okay," Tyler said, barely audible. Frank's smile widened, revealing perfectly white teeth. "Excellent decision, little Tyler. Come, my driver is waiting for us." As he followed Frank out of the alley, Tyler couldn't help feeling that he had just made a deal with the devil, but it was too late to turn back. For better or worse, his fate was sealed. As he climbed into the luxurious black SUV waiting on the street, Tyler took one last look at the familiar streets that had been his home for so long. For a moment, he thought he saw a familiar figure watching him from a distance, but when he blinked, there was no one there. The door closed with a definitive click, and the SUV drove off, taking Tyler towards an uncertain future. As the city streets passed by in a blur through the window, the boy couldn't know that this trip would change his life forever, nor that the surprises awaiting him that night would shake the foundations of his existence. At Frank's mansion, preparations for the party were in full swing. Servants ran back and forth, placing extravagant decorations and preparing trays of canapes that cost more than Tyler had seen in his entire life. In his office, Frank was making phone calls, a cruel smile playing on his lips as he spoke softly about his special guest. And somewhere in the city, a man named Lawrence was working in his office, unaware of the fact that tonight, his past and present would collide in a way that neither could have foreseen. The stage was set. The curtain was about to rise on a drama that would change the lives of everyone involved. And at the center of it all, a small street child, unaware of the crucial role he was about to play in this elaborate game of fate. The luxury car glided silently through the city streets, moving away from the bustle of downtown and into the exclusive neighborhoods of the Upper East Side. Tyler, with his nose pressed against the tinted glass, watched in amazement as the houses became larger and more ostentatious as they advanced. Finally, the vehicle stopped in front of an imposing wrought-iron gate. Tyler held his breath as the gates opened automatically, revealing a winding path bordered by perfectly manicured trees. "Welcome to my humble abode," said Frank, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The mansion that rose before them was anything but humble. It looked like something out of a fairy tale, with its white walls, huge windows, and a majestic fountain in the center of the front garden. Tyler had never seen anything like it. As they got out of the car, the boy suddenly became aware of his appearance. His dirty and worn clothes contrasted brutally with the luxury surrounding him. Frank, noticing his discomfort, placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but made Tyler shudder. "Don't worry, little one," the man said in a honeyed voice. "Soon you'll be presentable for the party." Tyler was led through marble hallways and rooms decorated with artwork, worth more than he could earn in several lifetimes. Finally, they arrived at a bathroom larger than any space Tyler had ever slept in. "Take a good bath," Frank ordered. "You'll find clean clothes when you're done. And remember, tonight you're my special guest. Behave well, and you'll have more food than you can imagine." With those words, Frank left, leaving Tyler alone in the luxurious bathroom. The boy looked at himself in the full-length mirror, barely recognizing his own reflection. For a moment, he allowed himself to dream of a different life, a life where belonging to this world of wealth and comfort wasn't just a passing fantasy. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Lawrence Swanson was preparing for the evening in his own penthouse. At 40 years old, he was one of the most successful businessmen in New York, known both for his sharp business mind and his philanthropy. As he adjusted his tie in front of the mirror, he couldn't help but let his mind wander to the past. It had been so many years, a different life, a family he had lost. He shook his head, pushing away the painful memories. Tonight was important. Frank Rivers, although not to his liking, was a crucial contact for his next urban development project. "Are you ready?" "Honey!" His wife Sarah's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Lawrence turned to look at her, impressed as always by her beauty. Sarah, in her designer dress and sparkling jewels, was the embodiment of elegance. "Yes, dear," Lawrence replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Let's go." Back at Frank's mansion, Tyler was coming out of the bathroom feeling like a completely different person. The suit they had left him, although a little big, was finer than anything he had ever touched before. His skin, clean for the first time in months, shone with a healthy ebony tone. However, as the moment of the party approached, a feeling of uneasiness grew in his stomach. Something in Frank's look, in the way he had insisted that he be his special guest, filled him with apprehension. His fears were confirmed when Frank came back to fetch him. "Ah, look at you," exclaimed the man, his eyes roaming over Tyler in a way that made the boy want to shrink. "You almost look like a human being now. Come, it's time for you to meet my guests." Tyler was led to a large room full of elegant people. The conversation stopped abruptly when they entered, and all eyes turned to them. Frank, far from feeling uncomfortable, seemed to enjoy the attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced in a resonant voice, "I present to you my special guest for tonight." I found him rummaging through the garbage. Can you believe it? I thought it would be educational for all of us to have a sample of how the other half lives. The laughter and murmurs that followed made Tyler wish the ground would swallow him. He understood then, with painful clarity, that he wasn't a guest but a spectacle, an object of mockery and amusement for these rich people. "Come on, boy," Frank urged, pushing him forward. "Tell us, what's it like living on the street? Is it as exciting as they say?" Tyler remained silent, his face burning with shame and anger. The guests began to approach, some with barely disguised expressions of disgust, others with a morbid curiosity that made him feel like an animal in a zoo. "Is it true that street children form gangs? How long have you been homeless? Are your parents also vagrants?" The questions rained down on him, each one more insensitive than the last. Tyler stood firm, refusing to give them the satisfaction of answering, although each word was like a dagger in his heart. At that moment, the door to the room opened, and a new couple entered. The man, tall and distinguished, stopped short when he saw the scene in front of him. His eyes met Tyler's, and for an instant, time seemed to stand still. Lawrence Swanson felt the world vanish around him. That face, those eyes, it was impossible, and yet— "Tyler," he whispered, his voice barely audible in the sudden silence that had fallen over the room. The boy, surprised to hear his name from the lips of this stranger, took a step back. But before he could respond, Frank intervened, his voice loaded with false joviality. "Ah, Lawrence, Sarah, welcome. I see you've already noticed our special guest. Fascinating, isn't it? An authentic street child. Right here in our—" Frank couldn't finish the sentence. In 2 strides, Lawrence had crossed the room and grabbed the host by the lapels of his jacket. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he growled, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. The party plunged into chaos. Guests murmured in confusion. Sarah tried to calm her husband, and Frank, for the first time that night, seemed to have lost control of the situation. And in the midst of it all, Tyler remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the man who had pronounced his name with such recognition and emotion. A distant memory, almost forgotten, began to emerge in his mind. A similar face, younger, smiling at him, a warm voice calling him son. As the chaos unfolded around him, Tyler felt he was on the edge of a precipice, about to fall towards a past he believed lost forever. The truth, hidden for so long, was about to come to light, changing the course of their lives forever. The silence that followed Lawrence's outburst was deafening. The guests, previously so eager to mock Tyler, now watched the scene with a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. Frank, his face pale and sweaty, tried to free himself from Lawrence's grip without success. "Lawrence, please," Sarah intervened, her voice trembling. "Let him go. You're causing a scene." But Lawrence seemed not to hear her. His eyes, filled with a mixture of fury and pain, were fixed on Frank. "How dare you," he hissed. "How dare you use a child, my son, for your sick entertainment?" The words fell like a bomb in the room. The murmurs intensified, and several glances were directed towards Tyler, who remained motionless, his eyes wide open and his heart beating so hard he feared everyone could hear it. Frank, taking advantage of the commotion, managed to break free from Lawrence's grip. "Your son?" he scoffed, although his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Don't be ridiculous, Lawrence. This street child can't be your son. Look at him. It's obvious he's not of your caliber." The comment, loaded with racial prejudice, provoked gasps among some guests and smiles of complicity in others. Lawrence took a threatening step towards Frank, but before he could do anything, a small but firm voice cut through the air. "Dad?" All eyes turned to Tyler. The boy had taken a step forward, his eyes fixed on Lawrence. At that moment, despite the years of separation and such different circumstances, the resemblance between them was undeniable. Lawrence turned slowly, as if fearing that moving too quickly would make the apparition of his lost son vanish. "Tyler," he whispered, extending a trembling hand towards the boy. "My little Tyler." Time seemed to stop as father and son looked at each other, recognizing each other after so many years. Sarah, with tears in her eyes, watched the scene in disbelief. She knew the story of the son Lawrence had lost, but seeing him here now was surreal. Frank, regaining some of his composure, tried to take control of the situation. "Come on, Lawrence," he said with a forced laugh. "You can't really believe this child is your son. He probably heard your name somewhere and is trying to take advantage. These street children are very cunning, you know." But Lawrence wasn't paying attention to him. With slow steps, he approached Tyler and knelt in front of him, coming to his height. "Son," he said in a broken voice, "do you remember me?" Tyler nodded slowly, his eyes filling with tears. "A little," he whispered. "I remember. I remember your voice and your eyes. You always read me stories before bed." Those words were all Lawrence needed. With a choked sob, he pulled Tyler towards him, hugging him tightly. The boy, after a moment of stiffness, relaxed into the embrace, allowing himself, for the first time in years, to feel safe and protected. The scene moved even the most cynical guests. Some were openly crying, others looked away, ashamed of their earlier behavior. Sarah slowly approached, kneeling next to Lawrence and Tyler. "Welcome home, little one," she said softly, stroking Tyler's hair. Frank, seeing how the situation was slipping out of his hands, tried one last play. "This is absurd," he exclaimed. "Lawrence, think rationally. How can you be sure this child is really your son? You'd need proof, a DNA test." Lawrence slowly stood up, his eyes burning with barely contained fury. "Frank," he said, in a dangerously calm voice, "I suggest you shut your mouth before I forget we're in public." Turning to the other guests, Lawrence continued, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry you had to witness this. I would appreciate it if you would leave now. This gathering is over." The guests, still stunned by the events, began to leave in silence. Some tried to approach to express their apologies or amazement, but one look from Lawrence was enough to dissuade them. When the room emptied, leaving only Frank, Lawrence, and Sarah and Tyler, the atmosphere became tense. Frank, nervous but still defiant, tried to speak. "Lawrence, let's be reasonable. This has all been a misunderstanding." "I didn't know..." "Didn't know what, Frank?" Lawrence interrupted, his voice loaded with contempt. "Didn't know you were using a defenseless child for your twisted entertainment. Didn't know you were exhibiting a human being as if he were a circus animal." Frank paled. I just wanted..." "I'm not interested in what you wanted," Lawrence cut him off. "What you've done tonight is unforgivable, and I assure you, you'll pay for it." Turning to Sarah and Tyler, his expression softened. "Let's go home," he said gently. "We have a lot to talk about." As they headed towards the exit, Tyler stopped and looked at Frank. The man who a few hours ago had seemed so powerful and intimidating now looked small and pathetic. With a maturity beyond his years, Tyler spoke. "Mr. Frank," he said, his voice clear and firm, "I hope someday you understand that what you did was wrong, not just to me, but to all children like me. We are people, not toys for your amusement." With those words, Tyler took Lawrence's hand and left the mansion, leaving behind a stunned and defeated Frank. In the car, on the way to Lawrence's home, the silence was palpable. Tyler, overwhelmed by the night's events, looked out the window with a mixture of amazement and apprehension. Lawrence and Sarah exchanged glances, both aware that their lives had just changed dramatically. Finally, Lawrence broke the silence. "Tyler," he said softly, "I know you have many questions. I promise we'll answer all of them. But for now, I want you to know that you're safe. You're home." Tyler nodded slowly, allowing himself, for the first time in years, to feel hope. As the car drove away from Frank's mansion and into the night, none of them could imagine the challenges and revelations that awaited them. The reunion was just the beginning of a story that would change their lives forever. Dawn found the Swanson family in a state of emotional shock. Tyler, exhausted by the previous night's events, slept deeply in a guest room that Sarah had hastily prepared. Lawrence, unable to sleep, was in his study. Staring fixedly at an old framed photograph, Sarah entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Have you slept at all?" she asked, although she already knew the answer. Lawrence shook his head, gratefully accepting the cup of coffee. "I can't believe we found him, Sarah." After all these years, Sarah sat next to him, observing the photograph he was holding. In it, a younger Lawrence smiled at the camera, holding a small Tyler of just 3 years old. The happiness on their faces was palpable. "What really happened, Lawrence?" Sarah asked softly. "I know you've never wanted to talk about it, but now—" Lawrence sighed deeply, closing his eyes for a moment before beginning to speak. "It was 9 years ago. I was married to Carla, Tyler's mother. We were young, ambitious. I was starting my career in business. And Carla, she was a passionate activist, always fighting for the rights of the most vulnerable." He paused, taking a sip of coffee before continuing. "One day, Carla discovered something, a child trafficking network that involved some of the most powerful families in New York. She was determined to expose them, despite my warnings about the danger." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "And what happened?" "One night, I was coming home from work and found the door open. The apartment was trashed. Carla, she was on the floor unconscious, and Tyler had disappeared." Lawrence's voice broke as he recalled that fateful night. "I called the police, but it was evident that someone had bought them off. The investigation was a farce. Carla never fully recovered from the attack. She died a year later without having spoken again." Sarah took Lawrence's hand, offering silent comfort. "I searched for Tyler everywhere. I hired private investigators, offered rewards. But it was as if he had vanished into thin air. With time I had to accept that maybe I would never find him." "Oh, Lawrence," Sarah whispered, with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry." At that moment, a noise at the door startled them. Tyler was there, his eyes wide open, having heard much of the conversation. "Tyler," said Lawrence, quickly standing up, "we didn't mean to wake you." The boy slowly entered the room, his eyes fixed on the photograph Lawrence was still holding. "That's me," he said quietly. "And you? And is that my mom?" Lawrence nodded, approaching Tyler and kneeling in front of him. "Yes, son, that's your mother, Carla. She was a wonderful and brave woman." Tyler touched the photograph with trembling fingers. "I don't remember her," he admitted sadly. "It's okay," Lawrence said softly. "You were very young when we were separated." Tyler looked at Lawrence, his eyes full of questions. "What happened? Why was I on the street? Why didn't you find me sooner?" Lawrence closed his eyes for a moment, fighting against the pain and guilt. "It's a complicated story, Tyler. Bad people separated us. I searched for you for years, but I couldn't find you. I'm so sorry, son. I should never have let this happen." To everyone's surprise, it was Tyler who stepped forward and hugged Lawrence. "It's not your fault, Dad," he said, his voice muffled against his father's chest. Sarah, watching the scene with tears in her eyes, approached and enveloped them both in a hug. For a moment, they allowed themselves to simply be together, healing wounds that had remained open for too long. When they finally separated, Tyler had a determined expression on his face. "What happened to the bad people? The ones who separated us?" Lawrence exchanged a look with Sarah before responding, "I don't know, Tyler. I never could find out exactly who they were, but I promise you that now that you're back, I'll do everything possible to find out and make sure they pay for what they did." Sarah intervened, her voice soft but firm. "But for now, the most important thing is that you're safe, Tyler. You're home." Tyler nodded slowly, but it was evident that his mind was working. "I want to help," he finally said. "I want to help other kids like me, the ones still on the street." Lawrence and Sarah looked at each other, surprised by the child's maturity and compassion. "That's very noble of you, Tyler," Lawrence said with pride, "and I promise we'll do something about it. But first, we need to make sure you're okay. You've been through a lot." Tyler nodded. But it was evident that the idea had taken root in his mind. The rest of the day passed in a mixture of emotions. Lawrence cancelled all his meetings, determined to spend time with his newly found son. Sarah immersed herself in preparations, making calls to arrange medical exams and consultations with lawyers to formalize Tyler's custody. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Frank Rivers was facing the consequences of his actions. News of the scandal at his party had spread quickly in high society circles. His phone wouldn't stop ringing, but they weren't calls of support. Business partners were cancelling contracts, friends were distancing themselves, and the media was starting to ask uncomfortable questions. Sitting in his luxurious office, Frank looked out the window, aware that his world was about to crumble. But instead of feeling remorse, a cold anger began to grow inside him. If he was going to fall, he would make sure he didn't fall alone. Taking his phone out, he dialed a number he had sworn never to use again. When they answered on the other end, his voice was cold and determined. "We have a problem. Swanson's son has reappeared." "Yes, that son. I need you to take care of this. And this time, make sure it's permanent." As he hung up, Frank couldn't know that his actions were about to trigger a series of events that would shake the foundations of New York society and endanger not only Tyler, but everyone around him. The battle for truth and justice was just beginning, and no one was prepared for the dark secrets that were about to come to light. The days following Tyler's reunion with his father were a whirlwind of emotions and activities. Lawrence, determined to make up for lost time, immersed himself completely in caring for his son. Tyler, for his part, struggled to adapt to his new life of luxury, so different from the streets that had been his home for so long. One morning, while having breakfast, Lawrence noticed that Tyler seemed distracted, playing with his food instead of eating it. "What's wrong, son?" he asked gently. Tyler looked up, his eyes full of a mixture of emotions. "I was thinking about my friends, the ones still on the street." Lawrence felt a pang of guilt. In the midst of the joy of recovering his son, he had momentarily forgotten the harsh reality from which Tyler came. "Do you want to tell me about them?" he asked, setting aside his newspaper. Tyler nodded slowly. "There's Lucy, she's only 9 years old, and Ramon, who takes care of all of us, and little Tommy. He must be so scared without me." Tyler's voice broke at the end, and Lawrence hurried around the table to hug his son. "We'll find them," he promised, "and we'll do everything we can to help them." At that moment, Sarah entered the kitchen, her face serious. "Lawrence, we need to talk in private." Lawrence frowned, but nodded. "Tyler, why don't you go watch some TV? We'll be with you in a moment." Once Tyler left the room, Sarah spoke in a low and urgent voice. "I just received a call from our private investigator. They've been following Frank since the party and... Lawrence, he's contacted someone dangerous." Lawrence felt his blood run cold. "What do you mean?" "They think Frank is trying to get rid of the problem, of Tyler." Fury flooded Lawrence. "That bastard! How dare he, after everything he's done?" Sarah put a hand on his arm, calming him. "We need to be careful. If Frank is really connected to the people who took Tyler years ago, we have to protect him," Lawrence interrupted, "and we need answers. It's time for Frank to pay for what he's done." Meanwhile, in his mansion, Frank Rivers paced nervously. His world was crumbling around him. Cancelled contracts, withdrawn invitations, even his own bank was questioning his transactions, all because of a street urchin. The doorbell startled him. When he opened it, he found himself face to face with a somber-looking man dressed in black. "Is it done?" Frank asked, without preamble. The man shook his head. "It's complicated. The boy is well protected. Swanson has hired additional security." Frank cursed under his breath. "What am I paying you for, then?" "Mr. Rivers," said the man in a cold voice, "I suggest you be patient. One wrong move and everything will come crashing down. Not just for you, but for everyone involved." Frank paled at the implication. "Just take care of it, and make sure it can't be traced back to me." Back at the Swanson house, Lawrence was taking measures. Additional bodyguards were hired, security systems upgraded. Tyler, oblivious to the dangers lurking, was slowly adapting to his new life. One afternoon, as Tyler played in the garden under the watchful eye of a bodyguard, Lawrence received an unexpected call. "Mr. Swanson," said a distorted voice on the other end of the line. "I have information about what happened to your son 9 years ago, but it comes at a price." Lawrence tensed. "Who are you? How did you get this number?" "That doesn't matter," the voice replied. "What matters is that I know who took your son and why. If you want to know, come alone to the old warehouse at Pier 17 tonight at 10. No police, no bodyguards." Before Lawrence could respond, the call cut off. Sarah, who had heard part of the conversation, looked at him with concern. "You're not going, are you? It's clearly a trap." Lawrence ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "What if it's not? What if this is our chance to get answers? What if it's Frank trying to lure you away from Tyler?" Sarah countered. The tension in the room was palpable. At that moment, Tyler entered, his smile fading as he saw the serious expressions on the adults' faces. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice small and worried. Lawrence tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing, champ. Just adult business." But Tyler wasn't easily fooled. Years on the street had taught him to read people, to sense danger. "It's about me, isn't it? Someone's coming for me." The silence that followed was all the confirmation Tyler needed. His eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry. Maybe I should leave. I don't want to cause you trouble." "No!" Lawrence and Sarah exclaimed in unison, running to hug the boy. "Tyler, listen to me," said Lawrence, looking his son in the eyes. "You are the most important thing in our lives. We're not going to let anything bad happen to you. I promise we'll solve this together." As he hugged his son, Lawrence made a decision. He would go to the meeting, but not alone. It was time to face the past, to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. What none of them knew was that this night would mark a turning point in their lives. Secrets buried for years would come to light, unexpected alliances would form, and danger lurked around every corner. As the sun set over New York City, the stage was set for a night that would change the course of their destinies forever. The night fell over New York City like a dark cloak, bringing with it a palpable tension. Lawrence, after much deliberation and a heated discussion with Sarah, had decided to go to the mysterious meeting at Pier 17. However, he wouldn't go alone as instructed. "I don't like this, Lawrence," Sarah said as she watched him prepare. "It's too dangerous." Lawrence hugged her, trying to convey a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "I'll be fine. Ramirez and his team will be nearby, and I'll wear a hidden microphone. If anything goes wrong, they'll intervene immediately." Tyler, who had been listening from the hallway, entered the room with a determined expression. "I want to go with you, Dad." "No way," Lawrence responded firmly. "It's too dangerous. You'll stay here with Sarah and the bodyguards." Tyler frowned. "But Dad, I know the streets better than you. I could help." Lawrence knelt in front of his son, putting his hands on the boy's shoulders. "Tyler, listen to me. The most important thing to me is keeping you safe. I promise I'll come back, and when I do, we'll have answers." With a last hug to his family, Lawrence left the house, got into his armored car, and headed towards the piers. Pier 17 was a desolate and gloomy place. Old abandoned warehouses stood like silent giants, mute witnesses to years of now-forgotten port activity. Lawrence parked his car at a prudent distance and walked the rest of the way, his steps echoing in the night silence. "I'm in position," he whispered to the hidden microphone in his lapel. "Do you copy?" "Loud and clear, sir," Ramirez's voice responded in his ear. "We have visual. Proceed with caution." Lawrence approached the designated warehouse, his senses on high alert. Just as he was about to reach the door, a voice stopped him. "Ah, Mr. Swanson, I see you decided to come after all." Lawrence turned sharply. From the shadows emerged a familiar figure that left him cold. Frank Rivers. "You?" Lawrence exclaimed, rage bubbling inside him. "What the hell are you doing here, Frank?" Frank smiled, but it was a cold smile, devoid of humor. Did you really think someone else would give you information about your precious son? Oh, Lawrence, you were always so naive. Before Lawrence could react, he felt a prick in his neck. He turned to see a rough-looking man holding an empty syringe. The world began to spin. What? What have you done to me? Lawrence stammered, feeling his legs give way. Just a little cocktail to make our chat more intimate, Frank replied with disdain. Take him away. As darkness enveloped him, Lawrence managed to see several figures emerging from the shadows. His last coherent thought was for Tyler and Sarah. Meanwhile, at the Swanson house, Tyler couldn't sit still. Something inside him told him his father was in danger. Taking advantage of a moment of distraction from Sarah and the bodyguards, the boy slipped out through a back window, using the skills he had perfected in his years on the street. With determination, Tyler headed towards the piers. He knew the city like the back of his hand and knew how to move without being detected. What he didn't know was that someone else was following him closely. In the warehouse, Lawrence slowly regained consciousness. He found himself tied to a chair, with Frank pacing in front of him. "Why, Frank?" Lawrence managed to ask, his voice hoarse. "What do you have to do with all this?" Frank stopped, looking at him with a mixture of contempt and something else. Guilt. "You have no idea, do you? You were always the golden boy, Lawrence, the brilliant businessman, the philanthropist, the perfect father, but you never saw what was right in front of you." "What are you talking about? Your dear wife, Carla?" Frank spat. "She discovered something she shouldn't have. A trafficking network that involved some of the most powerful families in New York, families like mine." Lawrence felt the world stop. "Fayukari, you were the one who took Tyler." Frank laughed bitterly. "Not personally, of course, but yes, I gave the order. It was a message, you understand, to make Carla shut up, but things got out of control." "You're a monster," Lawrence growled, struggling against his bonds. "Maybe," Frank admitted, "but I'm a monster with connections, and now that your son has reappeared, threatening to expose everything, well, I have to protect my interests." Before Frank could continue, a commotion was heard outside the warehouse. Shouts, gunshots, and the sound of breaking glass filled the air. "What the hell?" Frank exclaimed, pulling out a gun. Suddenly, the warehouse door burst open. To everyone's astonishment, Tyler ran in, closely followed by a group of street children. "Dad!" Tyler shouted, his eyes wide with horror at seeing Lawrence tied up. Frank, surprised by the sudden intrusion, pointed his weapon at Tyler. "Don't take another step, brat." But before he could do anything, a figure emerged behind Tyler. It was Ramon, the older boy Tyler had mentioned before. With surprising agility, Ramon lunged at Frank, disarming him. Chaos broke out in the warehouse. The street children, led by Tyler, attacked Frank's henchmen with a ferocity born of years of survival on the streets. Stones, sticks, and fists flew everywhere. Amidst the confusion, Tyler managed to reach Lawrence and began to untie him. "I've got you, Dad," he said with determination. "We're getting out of here." Just when it seemed the situation was under control, the sound of approaching sirens was heard. Ramirez's team, who had lost contact with Lawrence, had finally arrived. Frank, seeing that all was lost, tried to escape, but Ramon, with surprising strength for someone his age, held him down until the police entered. As officers secured the scene and arrested Frank and his accomplices, Lawrence hugged Tyler tightly, tears of relief and pride in his eyes. "How?" he began to ask. Tyler smiled, a mixture of mischief and determination on his face. "I told you I knew the streets, Dad, and my friends would never abandon me." Lawrence looked around, seeing the street children who had risked everything to save them. At that moment, he made a decision that would change not only their lives, but the lives of many others. "Tyler," he said firmly, "I think it's time we make your dream of helping other kids like you a reality." As father and son left the warehouse, surrounded by the brave children who had saved them, they knew this was just the beginning. The truth had come to light, but the path to justice and redemption was just beginning. The days following the incident at the pier were a whirlwind of activity. The news of Frank Rivers' decapture and his connection to a child trafficking network shook New York society to its core. The media talked about nothing else, and the repercussions were felt in the highest circles of power. Lawrence, still recovering from the kidnapping, found himself at the center of a media storm. However, his focus was on something much more important, fulfilling the promise he had made to Tyler. One morning, a week after the incident, Lawrence gathered his family in the living room. Tyler, Sarah, and to everyone's surprise, Ramon and some of the other children who had helped in the rescue were present. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," Lawrence began, his voice laden with emotion, "and about the promise I made to Tyler. It's time to do something real, something that can change the lives of these children and many others." Sarah took his hand, giving it a supportive squeeze. "What do you have in mind, honey?" Lawrence smiled, looking at each of those present. "I'm going to create a foundation, one that not only provides shelter and education to street children, but also works to dismantle the trafficking and abuse networks that put them in danger in the first place." Tyler's eyes lit up. "Really, Dad? We're going to help other kids like me?" "That's right, son," Lawrence replied, ruffling his hair affectionately. "And I want you and your friends to be an integral part of this. No one knows the needs of these children better than you do." Ramon, who had remained quiet until then, stepped forward. His posture was cautious, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. "Why would you do this, sir? What do you gain?" Lawrence wasn't offended by the question. He understood the young man's distrust of adults, especially rich and powerful ones. "I don't gain anything, Ramon, except the satisfaction of doing the right thing. For years, I ignored what was happening on the streets of our city. It's time to change that." Tyler approached his friend, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Trust him, Ramon. My dad keeps his promises." Gradually, the tension in the room dissipated, replaced by a feeling of hope and possibility. The children began to talk all at once, sharing ideas about how the foundation could best help. "We need a safe place to sleep," said a small girl named Lucy. "And schools," added another boy. "I want to learn to read well." Lawrence listened attentively, making mental notes. "All that and more," he promised. "But we'll need help. This is bigger than us." Sarah, who had been thoughtful, spoke up. "I have an idea. What if we organize a fundraising event, something that not only raises money, but also raises awareness about these children's situation?" "That's brilliant, Sarah," Lawrence exclaimed. Then, turning to the children, he asked, "What do you think if we organize an art exhibition? You could create paintings or sculptures that tell your stories." The idea was received with enthusiasm. Even Ramon, the most skeptical of the group, seemed intrigued by the possibility. The following days were a frenzy of activity. Lawrence used his contacts to secure a space for the exhibition, while Sarah took care of logistics and publicity. Tyler and his friends, for their part, immersed themselves in a world of colors and creativity, capturing their experiences on canvases and sculptures. The day of the exhibition arrived faster than anyone expected. The chosen venue, an old factory converted into an art gallery, was full of people. Politicians, businessmen, celebrities, and ordinary citizens mingled, all attracted by the promise of seeing something unique. Lawrence, dressed in an elegant but sober suit, stood before the crowd to give an opening speech. Beside him were Tyler and the other children, dressed in new clothes, but with faces reflecting a mixture of nervousness and pride. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lawrence began, his voice resonating in the space. "Tonight we are not just here to see art. We are here to witness a change. Every painting, every sculpture you see here tells a story of survival, of pain, but also of hope." He paused, looking at Tyler with affection before continuing. "For years we have ignored the children on our streets. We have treated them as invisible, as a problem we prefer not to see. But no more. Tonight, I ask you to open your hearts and minds, to see these children for what they truly are, the future of our nation." As people toured the exhibition, gasps of amazement could be heard, and tears could be seen in many eyes. The artworks, raw and emotional, told stories of hunger, cold, fear, but also of friendship, resilience, and dreams that refused to die. One painting in particular caught everyone's attention. It was by Tyler, and it showed two intertwined hands, one small and dark, the other larger and lighter. Around the hands, darkness gradually transformed into light. The title of the work was simple but powerful: Hope. By the end of the night, the exhibition had been a resounding success. Not only had significant funds been raised for the new foundation, but several businessmen and politicians had committed to supporting the cause long-term. As the crowd dispersed, Lawrence found himself alone with Tyler and Ramon. "We did it, didn't we, Dad?" Tyler asked, his eyes shining with excitement. Lawrence nodded, hugging his son. "Yes, we did, but this is just the beginning." Ramon, who had remained silent for most of the night, finally spoke. "Mr. Swanson, thank you. For the first time in my life, I feel that maybe things can be different." Lawrence put a hand on the young man's shoulder. "They will be, Ramon. I promise you, together, we're going to change things." As they left the gallery into the night of New York City, there was a palpable feeling of hope in the air. The road ahead would be difficult, full of obstacles and challenges, but for the first time in a long time, the future seemed bright for the children of the streets. The Interlaced Hands Foundation, as they decided to call it, was taking its first steps. And with it, a new chapter began in the lives of Tyler, Lawrence, and all those who had joined their cause. 6 months had passed since the successful art exhibition and the launch of the Interlaced Hands Foundation. Tyler's life had changed drastically. He now lived comfortably with Lawrence and Sarah, attended a private school, and actively participated in the foundation's projects. However, the shadows of his past still haunted him in his dreams. One night, Tyler woke up screaming, drenched in cold sweat. Lawrence and Sarah ran to his room, alarmed. "Tyler, what's wrong, son?" Lawrence asked, hugging the trembling boy. Between sobs, Tyler managed to articulate, "I saw them again, Dad. The men who took me, and there were other kids. So many scared kids." Sarah and Lawrence exchanged worried looks. They knew that, despite the progress, Tyler's trauma was far from fully healed. "It's okay, my love," Sarah whispered, stroking Tyler's hair. "You're safe now, no one will hurt you." But Tyler's words had awakened something in Lawrence. The child trafficking network that Frank had mentioned, what if it was still operating? Frank's capture had been a blow, but had it been enough to dismantle the entire organization? The next day, while Tyler was at school, Lawrence met with his legal and investigative team at the Foundation's offices. "I want you to investigate thoroughly," Lawrence ordered. "Every connection of Frank's end, every rumor, every lead, no matter how small. If that network is still operating, we're going to find it and destroy it." Ramon, who now worked as a youth liaison at the Foundation, listened from a corner of the room. "Mr. Swanson," he intervened, his voice laden with seriousness. "There are places that street kids talk about in whispers, places some never come back from." Lawrence turned to him, his expression grave. "Tell me everything you know, Ramon. Every detail could be crucial." Meanwhile, in a maximum security prison, Frank Rivers was receiving an unexpected visit. An elegant, middle-aged woman sat across from him in the visiting room. "Clara," Frank greeted, his voice a mixture of surprise and disdain. "To what do I owe the honor of your visit, dear sister?" Clara Rivers, a respected federal Judge E, looked at her brother with a mixture of disgust and concern. "You've really screwed up this time, Frank. The network is in danger because of your incompetence." Frank leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with malice. "In danger, please. Swanson has no idea how deep this goes. I may be here, but the operation continues. Our associates will make sure of that." Clara stood up, smoothing her skirt with a nervous gesture. "I hope so. For everyone's sake. Remember, Frank, if you fall, you won't fall alone." As Clara left the prison, she didn't notice the figure watching her from a parked car. Ramon, following Lawrence's instructions, had been monitoring Frank's visits. He quickly took a photo of Clara with his phone and sent a message, "I think we have something." Back at the Swanson mansion, Tyler was in the garden, painting. Art had become his escape, his way of processing the emotions and memories that sometimes overwhelmed him. Sarah watched him from the terrace, marveling at the child's resilience. Lawrence arrived, his face showing signs of worry and fatigue. "How is he?" he asked Sarah in a low voice. "Better," she replied. "The art really helps him." "But Lawrence, what's wrong? You look exhausted." Lawrence sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I think we're close to something big," Sarah. Something that could endanger a lot of powerful people, and us. Before he could elaborate, his phone rang. It was Ramon. The information he provided made Lawrence pale. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, alarmed. "The woman who visited Frank. She's Clara Rivers, his sister, and she's a federal judge." The implication was clear and terrifying. If a federal judge was involved, the corruption reached much higher than they had imagined. That night, during dinner, the tension was palpable. Tyler, perceptive as always, noticed something was wrong. "Dad, Sarah, what's going on?" he asked, putting down his fork. Lawrence and Sarah exchanged glances, silently debating how much to reveal. Finally, Lawrence spoke. "Tyler, remember when I promised you we'd do everything possible to help other kids like you?" Tyler nodded, his eyes large and attentive. "Well, we're close to discovering something very important. Something that could help many children, but it could also be dangerous." Tyler remained silent for a moment, processing the information. Then, with a maturity that surprised the adults, he said, "We have to do it, don't we? We can't let other kids suffer like I did." Lawrence felt a surge of pride and love for his son. "That's right, champ. But I need you to promise me something. If at any moment you feel you're in danger, or you see something suspicious, you'll tell me immediately, okay?" Tyler nodded solemnly. "I promise, Dad." That night, as the Swanson family prepared for bed, none of them could imagine the dangers lurking in the shadows. In various corners of the city, powerful figures were moving, conspiring to protect their dark secrets. Clara Rivers, in her luxurious office, made frantic calls, alerting her accomplices about the threat Lawrence Swanson and his foundation represented. On the streets, rumors began to circulate. Children spoke in whispers about a rich man who wanted to help them, but also about shadows that lurked, seeking to silence anyone who talked too much. And somewhere in the city, a group of men met in secret, planning their next move. In the center of the table was a photograph, the smiling image of Tyler Swanson. Danger was approaching, and the battle for truth and justice was about to reach a critical point. The Swanson family and all those involved in the Interlaced Hands Foundation found themselves on the edge of a precipice, not knowing that their lives were about to change forever. The next morning dawned gray and rainy, as if the weather reflected the tension hanging over the Swanson family. Lawrence, who had barely slept, was in his study reviewing the latest reports from his investigators when Sarah entered with a cup of coffee. "Have you discovered anything new?" she asked, noticing the dark circles under her husband's eyes. Lawrence sighed, rubbing his temples. "Every lead we follow takes us into a deeper labyrinth of corruption. Clara Rivers isn't just a federal judge, Sarah. She's the tip of the iceberg. There are politicians, businessmen, even police chiefs involved in this network." Sarah sat next to him, her face showing concern. "Lawrence, this is bigger than us. Maybe we should consider letting the authorities handle it." "What authorities, Sarah?" Lawrence interrupted, his voice tinged with frustration. "We don't know who we can trust. Every step we take could be alerting those responsible." At that moment, Tyler entered the study, his face serious beyond his years. "Dad, Sarah, I think you should see this." The boy turned on the study's television. On the news, a reporter was speaking in front of the entrance to the Interlaced Hands Foundation. Allegations that the Interlaced Hands Foundation, led by businessman Lawrence Swanson, might be involved in illegal activities. Anonymous sources suggest that the organization could be being used as a front for money laundering and other illicit activities. Lawrence jumped to his feet, his face pale with disbelief. "This is impossible. Who's behind this?" Sarah hugged Tyler, who was trembling slightly. "It's her, isn't it?" the boy asked. "The bad woman who visited Frank in prison." Before Lawrence could respond, his phone rang. It was Ramon. "Mr. Swanson," the young man's voice sounded agitated. "They're here. The police. They're searching the Foundation's offices. They say they have a search warrant." Lawrence felt the ground move beneath his feet. Everything they had worked for was in danger. But more than that, Tyler's safety and that of all the children they had helped was at risk. "Ramon, listen to me carefully," Lawrence said, struggling to maintain calm. Don't let them take anything. Call our lawyers immediately. And please, make sure all the children are safe. Hanging up the phone, Lawrence turned to his family. We need to move fast. They're trying to discredit us, to destroy everything we've built. Tyler, with surprising determination, spoke. We can't let them win, Dad. Not after everything we've done. Sarah nodded, taking her husband's hand. What's the plan? Lawrence took a deep breath, his mind working at full speed. First, we need to protect the children. Then, we're going to counterattack. It's time for the truth to come to light, no matter the consequences. As the Swanson family prepared for the battle ahead, in another part of the city, Clara Rivers smiled satisfied in front of her television. Her plan was in motion. But what she didn't know was that Lawrence Swanson had an ace up his sleeve, a piece of information that could change the entire game. The storm was about to break, and no one was prepared for the revelations that were about to come. New York City woke up to news that shook its foundations. Lawrence Swanson, in a live press conference, revealed a series of documents and recordings that exposed the extensive corruption network involving judges, politicians, and businessmen in child trafficking. For months, Lawrence declared, his voice firm and determined, we have worked tirelessly to unmask this criminal network that has been exploiting the most vulnerable in our society. Today, we present irrefutable evidence of its existence and the individuals involved. Beside him, Tyler stood, his presence a powerful reminder of the victims and survivors of this terrible crime. The repercussions were immediate. Clara Rivers was arrested while trying to flee the country. Frank, from his cell, watched as his criminal empire crumbled, one after another. Those implicated in the network fell, unable to escape the avalanche of evidence presented. The Interlaced Hands Foundation, far from being discredited, emerged as a beacon of hope and justice. The accusations against it were revealed as desperate fabrications by those trying to silence them. Weeks later, in an emotional ceremony, the government officially recognized the work of Lawrence, Tyler, and all those involved in exposing the truth. The foundation received additional funds and support to expand its work. Ramon, now youth director of the foundation, led rehabilitation and education programs for children rescued from the streets. We've come a long way, he said in an interview, but there's still much to do. One afternoon, as Lawrence and Tyler painted together in their home's garden, the boy stopped and looked at his father. You know, Dad, when I lived on the streets, I never imagined I could have a family again. I thought I was alone in the world. Lawrence put down his brush and hugged his son. You'll never be alone again, Tyler. And thanks to you. Many other children won't be either. Sarah watched them from the terrace, her heart full of love and pride. The family they had formed, born from tragedy and forged in adversity, was now a symbol of hope for the entire city. That night, as New York City shone under the stars, the Swanson family celebrated not just their personal triumph, but the beginning of real change in society. The fight wasn't over, but they had taken a giant step towards a better future. Tyler, looking out the window of his room, smiled. For the first time in a long time, his dreams were full of hope and possibilities, not nightmares from the past. The road had been long and difficult, but finally, the truth had triumphed. And with it, the promise of a new dawn for the children of New York.